John Ross doesn't really mind that. He's the head of the Cherokee. He'll be the head of the Cherokee when the war breaks out. Initially, the Cherokee and the 5 civilized tribes, I'm using that term in quotes because that's what people know, the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Seminole, etc. When the war breaks out, all the forts are abandoned by the Union Army for obvious reasons. They have to have the military. The military is 16,000 men. That's how big the U.S. Army is at the beginning of the Civil War. 16,000. I mean, that's just phenomenal to me. I'm sorry, I'm laughing, but that's just a tiny number compared to the millions that are going to be in the Army in just a year or so. 16,000. They pull out Indian Territory. Immediately, the Confederates come in and negotiate with the American Indians. Well, if you're a Cherokee and you think about removal, whose side might you want to be on? Confederates promise the annuities, promise protection. Most of the Cherokees, most of the civilized tribes go with the Confederacy initially. But John Ross, who is a slaveholder, and most of the non-slaveholding civilized tribe guys eventually split with the Confederacy almost immediately and switch sides. And that, of course, leads to a major war in Indian Territory. And a war that Ross begs Lincoln to do something about. But Lincoln really can't. He says, I'll try to help if I can. I promise you protection if I can get it, but it's unlikely that I'm going to be able to get it very soon. And what he told the delegation of the 5 civilized tribes that came to ask for his help is, quote, "The pale-faced people are numerous and prosperous because they cultivate the earth, produce bread, and depend upon the products of the earth rather than the wild game for subsistence." Then he goes on to basically say, you better do this too, and then we'll see about helping you. Thoughts on that? Quote, "This idea of assimilation is seen as a way of saving American Indians. Reservation to assimilation to a salvation." Now, the interesting thing is, how do American Indians use that is in the opposite direction. They go on the reservations, but then they use the reservations as agency to protect their culture and save their culture in a lot of ways, and never really assimilate into American society. And yet, reservations are very powerful things, especially where I come from in Arizona. Reservations are very common and very powerful agents. Now, the Cherokees do lose the reservation eventually, but they're still a powerful force in Oklahoma politics. So there's also other incidences along the Apache, the Long Pass, and the California Column, the Long Walk, and the Navajo. Chief Pocatello, Lincoln negotiates a treaty with him. There's all kinds of other incidents in which Lincoln lays this foundation for the reservation system that I think is really an alternative to extinction. Does the ends justify the means? Well, probably not. We could have that debate forever, right? I mean, it doesn't justify that black people in America are the richest blacks in the world because they had slavery. That doesn't really, ends doesn't justify the means. The question is, what is the alternative? Okay, that's great. You think American Indians are victims. What is the alternative? The leave them alone policy was never going to happen. That's what a lot of people like to say, the leave them alone policy, because white people wanted land. They desired, their dream was their own land. And so what do? And I would argue if the land in the West was as good as it is in the Midwest for farming, we might not have reservations, or American Indians might very well be extinct. But everybody in the Midwest that wanted to go west, and who goes to Kansas, Nebraska, figured that the land out west would just be just like it is here. You know, fertile and easy access to water, and of course, we know that's not true. But their ignorance of geography is amazing. And they write down some of the things they write down. I mean, that explains the Donner Party, really. So that's kind of my conclusion, is just that Lincoln's policies, though they're kind of diverse, you got to think about his context as a Midwesterner and what his ideas are about expansionism, mostly to prevent slavery, but he's definitely a humanitarian in the presence that he does not want American Indians to become extinct. He wants to preserve those as people, and the way to do that, he felt like, and most presidents for the next 30 or 40 years will believe, is to prevent their extinction through reservation, through assimilation. Now, I guarantee you Grant and Lincoln, if they came back to life today, would freak out if they saw the power of American Indian reservations, because they assumed the reservations would go away once they assimilated. But American Indians have turned that into their advantage, I would argue, and utilized it and survived. So if you don't, I'll take questions if you guys have them now. No questions? I informed you completely? Any question about Grant, who I find his policy is more interesting actually than Lincoln's because he's more involved.
Actually, I have a question going back to Custer at the beginning.
Okay.
Custer, from what I remember, his body wasn't mutilated at World War I.
That's a debate we could have too.
Is that true?
It's a debate we could have. They believe that people could come back to life, and so they mutilate the body and take out the heart and stuff. So, and the story about the 2 spears being poked in his ears so he'd listen when he got to heaven. They don't.
So there's no. We don't know.
We don't know.
If it's true or not true.
He has a huge. I mean, Custer's legacy. No offense to Michiganders. Of course, he's born in Ohio, which most Michiganders think he's a Michigander. But he's born in Ohio, and he claims that Ohio legacy because Sherman, Sheridan, Grant are all born in Ohio as well. But Custer, his legacy is created mostly by Libby Custer. His wife creates this huge legacy for him. If you've ever gone to West Point, that's where his tombstone is, and it's it's huge tombstone. It looks like this huge obelisk tombstone that she has created for him. Of course, his body's not even there, but it's got to have a tombstone at the military academy, where he graduated last in his class, by the way. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Ken.
So, how would you conclude then Lincoln's policies with Native American Indians as far as in relationship to carrying on a war, a civil war?
I think they're very practical and humanitarian, because I think he could have. His discussions about reform are pretty much always about this reservation for assimilation. He's not ever talking about wiping out Americans. As soon as the Civil War, we're going to send the army out west and mow them down. That's a myth that people want to believe, that Lincoln would have wanted the westward white expansion forever. Now, would he have pushed the railroads like Grant did? Absolutely, I think. But he would also create a reservation system that saved American Indians from extinction.
Do you see that kind of an evolution of his philosophy about slavery as well, in conjunction with his Native American Indian policy?
Yep. I think he's a humanitarian that's practical, and he can only be so practical. And he can only be so humanitarian. I mean, he executes 30 people. It's the largest execution of any president in history.
Do you think your perception from the South, because I know you emphasized that on many occasions, had any influence on this perception of Lincoln and his Indian policy?